Okay, well, welcome to another episode of CX Voices. I am Katie Kemshell and I'm joined today by Tom Boyle. Hi, Tom.
Hello, you okay?
Yeah, really good. Give us a little bit of your background, Tom.
Okay, so Tom Boyle, as you said, Katie, head of Telecoms at Sheffield Teaching Hospitals. I also work in a similar role part time for Sherwood Forest Hospitals. I've worked in the NHS for 15 years now, across all different bits of IT. Originally in analytics, then I worked in project and program management, service management, and now all things telecoms, patient engagement, CX, the new exciting word for everything like that. That's me in a nutshell.
Brilliant. Well, thanks for coming on. I know we've been talking quite a lot about some interesting sort of topical discussion points. So we're going to start by just leaning into some of the more recent research that Cavell have released around the generational gap that's now kind of represented across the workforce and how we see some of the impact of that within healthcare. So let's get into that a little bit. Effectively, what Cavell have seen through their research is that we now have four generations represented in the workplace for the first time ever. People are getting older and working to older ages. So we've got everyone from the baby boomers all the way through to Generation Z represented in the workplace. At the same time, obviously within hospitals, your patients that you're dealing with, and suddenly the technology that people are consuming is hugely different across those generations. So talk to us a little bit about, is that something that's considered within the hospital?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us in healthcare as well, from a patient facing perspective, it's been a thing for a lot longer, mainly because ageing population, we obviously serve the entire community aside from children at the hospitals that I work at, is that we've had all of those generations that we need to communicate with. Obviously now in terms of a workforce perspective it's becoming more apparent, but yes, it's absolutely at the centre of everything that we do because we're so reliant historically on sending letters, in making and receiving phone calls. That's not the way that everyone wants to communicate. I think that's the biggest bugbear for me, is there's an assumption that everyone wants to receive a letter in English, everyone can have a telephone call in English, they can do it between 9 to 5 Monday and Friday because they're always available. And yeah, it's absolutely at the centre of everything that we do. We can't do a one size fits all approach anymore.
Yeah. And what are you seeing? Are you seeing that obviously that generational gap that has caused this huge difference in terms of how we consume technology? Are you seeing that the hospital are kind of are catering for that change in technology? Are they quite forward thinking in terms of what do we do to deal with this, or what's happening internally?
I think that there's a broad spectrum across the NHS of how people are tackling it. There's, like in all industries, there's some brilliance and there's some otherwise. I think that it's become more and more apparent for us because of the earlier generations. They're now comparing their experience with healthcare with their experience in a coffee shop or in any other retail area. So I think that because that assumption's made, like why can I order a coffee and I can just go and pick it up? I don't have to interact with anyone. It's just there on the side. Why can I do that? But then when I want to book an appointment or change my appointment, why have I got to make a phone call? It's as if it's the only way that they can do it. Whereas I think with the older generations, it's just always been the case. That's, you get a letter from the hospital and you have to ring them to amend your appointment. I think it was just accepted that was the way that it was. Like I say, because in other industries that's not the case anymore, and health isn't just compared to, I don't know, the experience you get with your GP or an acute hospital or a different acute hospital down the road. Patients are waking up to it and they're quite rightly asking the question, why can it happen in this industry, and then something that's even more emotive and important, why isn't it happening in health?
Yeah, and I mean, we're seeing that across banking, across so many different sectors where consumers have now very much got used to newer ways of working, whether that's using AI or chat. And so there's this new expectation that their healthcare environments or their banking environments should also be providing it in exactly the same way they can consume it personally.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think moving forward, it's only going to get more apparent. I can't imagine that there's any NHS organisation or private healthcare organisation that aren't weighing up how they need to change how they interact with patients and allow patients to interact with them. If not, they're gonna get left behind. It happens more and more in the States with the work that I've done in the States, is that accepting it's a different model, the private model in healthcare. But if you're having care at one hospital organisation and the experience is terrible, you'll go and have your care delivered at a different hospital organisation, and that does happen in the UK. Women choose where they want to have a baby now. They don't necessarily have to have it where their local hospital is. People can choose where they have any of their care, and I think that it's all because of experience of the treatment, obviously, but I think more so the experience that they have in advance of the treatment, and that's shaping what they perceive the care to be like.
So if we look at, say, let's think about Gen Z. So the research is now saying that they won't answer the phone. It's just considered not a way of communicating. How are hospitals kind of tapering how they're providing communication? You know, in Sheffield, are you now saying, okay, well, let's stop relying on phone calls then? What's happening? Where are the discussions being shaped?
I think that's what we're looking at in terms of strategy. We're considering that we need to have different channels. We need to open up the channels that we communicate in. And I think that that's the same at most healthcare providers, and I think that vendors are fully aware of that. I think they know now that different generations want to communicate in different ways. So whether that is a telephone, whether that is leaving a voice message or receiving a letter, but at the other end of the spectrum, I think it is considering the use of chatbots, the use of live chat. I think that live chat particularly is super beneficial for patients and super beneficial for the workforce. You can handle multiple live chats at the same time as you could a single phone call. And on the other side of it, from a patient perspective, you can reply when it suits you. It doesn't have to be immediate. You can get to the front of the queue, but you can reply instantly, or you can reply in a few minutes, you can reply in half an hour. Never mind the fact then that all of this technology is available that can translate it instantly, so that the agent can talk in their native language. The patient can talk in their native language. The agent can have that instantly translated. They can respond, and then it's translated back. I think that opens up so many more opportunities to interact with patients in the way that they want to interact, instead of hospital trust defining how they interact with people and saying it's this way or nothing.
So I'm interested then, obviously, yourself in your role. So you're millennial?
I think so.
Millennial. So if you look internally within your trust at the decision makers, at those sort of represented at board level,
Mm-hmm.
how is the generational gap reflected within that environment? And would you say that that's having an impact in terms of how technology is then rolled out or understood?
Yeah, I think that, and this is real broad spectrum, is that I think that most hospital boards are traditionally Gen X, probably baby boomers at the same time. There's a mixture of that. I think that most then heads of department, directors, and that sort of level, I think it's a similar sort of generation there. I think that in turn, rightly or wrongly, I think more wrongly, is that because they're from a generation that only understands certain ways of communicating, they're going to lean more into those ways of communicating. So I think that because the decision makers are from certain generations, it does have an impact on it. I think that it's becoming more apparent lately that boards, especially in healthcare, are considerate of the fact that they need to have greater representation from different generations. I think that probably isn't in a executive role. I think they're sort of more introducing it in non-exec roles and associate non-exec directors. That's a new thing in healthcare. And I think that they're cognizant of the fact that that needs to be people that represent the communities more accurately that their patients are from. But yeah, I think that I've said to you before, I think that if we were at an industry event, or if I was with peers from other organisations, no one is really my age. But that isn't to say that I don't understand the full spectrum of how generations communicate. I think that potentially some of the older generations don't necessarily understand how newer generations communicate because they've never been forced into experiencing it themselves in healthcare.
Yeah, and I think it is interesting, this research that CAFEL have found, is that it is the first time in history that you've had this huge gap between those who are represented in the workforce at the same time as the huge gap in technology. Has the gap in the way that we communicated ever been as significant as it is now? So you've got these two things that are overlaying that have never happened, and it's interesting to see in these sort of systemic organisations that are so huge and so process driven in terms of, if you're coming in as a younger person, what is the process to be able to be represented at board level? Is there even a possibility of that happening based on historic ways of being able to get to that level, for example?
I think that the pathways are being developed. I certainly haven't experienced them, but like I was saying earlier, I think that there's more and more acceptance that a non-exec director role isn't necessarily someone that's worked in industry for 50 years, has retired and is now giving back. I think that associate non-exec directors are becoming more more prolific across different healthcare trusts, and they're catered to people that are maybe very experienced in operational and strategic management, but they haven't necessarily been on a board or worked with a board before. So I think that's potentially a path in. I think the thing that a lot of trusts are doing that I think is super beneficial is shadow boards, and having a board. Obviously you're having your board, but having these shadow boards, and it's a two-way interaction. So that then allows people of a different generation to have, not necessarily, they're not voting members, they're not board members, they're not execs, they're not non-exec directors, but it gives an insight into how different generations are thinking and how they would make different decisions without fully integrating them into the board. I don't think that that's happening quite as much as it needs to in healthcare. I think it's super apparent in industry. I can't imagine that you would go to many tech head offices and find a similar makeup. Using Cavell as an example, most of their analysts are my age. They understand the industry and they understand how different generations work, so it makes sense. It begs the question, that should probably be the same in healthcare at sort of strategic and board level, is that you need to be representative of the community that you serve. So I think it's going to become more apparent. I don't think the pathways are necessarily there yet, and I don't think there's any sort of absolute gold standard organisations that people are following. I think it'll come, but I think we're some way off at the minute.
Right, let's talk a little bit about neurodiversity. I know it's a topic that you're quite passionate about. Talk to us a little bit about why you're passionate about the topic, and we'll delve into how it affects kind of communication within hospitals.
So yeah, I think for me, it was COVID. Is that being at home a lot more, not having any of the routine and the structure that I had at work all the time, it made me sort of try best to understand why I was behaving in a certain way, probably why I was annoying my wife and kids as much as I was. Ultimately led to, I think maybe 4 or 5 years ago, initially being diagnosed with ADHD, which for anyone that knows me, you've known me for a long time, Katie, I can talk a lot, I don't stand and sit still, I can't necessarily concentrate on any one thing at a time. It wasn't that much of a shock. What was more of a shock, I think, is that as I began to take medication for the ADHD, I didn't feel any better, I felt worse, and ultimately that was because of undiagnosed ASD, so autism, which then was diagnosed, and the ADHD sort of masked the autism. And then on this big sort of journey of me trying to better understand myself, and in turn understanding all of the reasons why I maybe act in a certain way or why I communicate in a certain way, it's made me then translate that back to work, and considering actually that in me saying that in years gone by I wouldn't have wanted to ring an NHS trust to chase my appointment. I didn't want to ring the doctors. It wasn't because I just didn't want to, there was a reason for it. And I think in this ever diverse population that we've got now, it's more apparent than ever, and we need to consider all of those different neurodiverse reasons why or why not people want to interact with healthcare. So yeah, that's why it's really apparent for me. And yeah, all it's done though is just make me more and more frustrated in showing that the channels that we use to communicate in healthcare are so narrow. And if that's the case and it sort of restricts people with neurodiverse conditions interacting with healthcare, how does it then affect people from different religious backgrounds, different sexes, different, you name it? How does it then segregate and isolate them? It really has opened my eyes to how, yeah, we really restrict and isolate access to care for people.
And have you seen, obviously with the development of new ways of communicating, you know, even over the last 12 months, things have developed massively, and I know you're a huge consumer of AI personally. I don't know as much kind of corporately, but have you seen that it's made a big difference in the way that it's enabled you in communicating?
I think so. I think for people that I've spoken to and told them about the diagnosis, I think I've felt more comfortable in telling people and then explaining, actually, if you're going to get an email from me that's 3 pages long and I'm absolutely empty in my brain, that's just the way that I like to communicate. It's 3 a.m, that's when I'm available and working. It doesn't change how they interact with me. Equally, if I'm short and blunt with someone and we have a call or a face-to-face meeting, it's probably because I don't think it necessitates a meeting. It's not because I don't want to, I'm not interested, but it could have been something that could have been dealt with in a Teams message or an email. And I think that's then become more apparent for everyone across the hospital trust, not just mine, but other trusts as well, is that, yeah, we need to be way more considerate about how people want to interact and how they interact with others. I think it can put a lot of people off, really. I think in the past, it used to be the same people, I bet, across every boardroom, across every strategic meeting in every industry, that there'd be 3 or 4 people that would be the loudest and they're the ones that would be listened to. But I think it's opened up everyone's eyes to the fact that lots of people have got something to say, they just don't necessarily say it in the same way as others, and he who shouts loudest isn't the be all end all. It's certainly made me consider that. But yeah, it's with the advent of people using direct messaging in Teams more and more, with less face-to-face meetings, more stuff virtually. I think it's suited me way better. I think that it means that I can operate at whatever level I want to and not feel like I have to fit in with the way that was considered normal, which 5 or 6 years ago was being on site, wearing a suit. You'll have never seen me in a shirt and trousers, let's face it. I've never worn a suit. And I think it's yeah, I mean, even beyond communicating, just stuff like that. Just how people are comfortable in what they wear to work. It doesn't change how they work and what they've got to say, but it has a massive impact on them and how comfortable they are in what they do. And I think there's a lot of people that have probably left working in healthcare, left working in any industry, because there's been such a regimented way of this corporate image that they need to meet, and they don't meet it. Whereas I think nowadays it's becoming more acceptable to consider different ways of working, different styles of working. People are more aware of it.
And would you say within the hospital environment, is that something that you've seen change? Because I know a lot of people within the private sector, a lot of people are now encouraging people physically to be coming back into the office more. There's a little bit more pressure that's been rising even over the last 12 months. Has that been experienced within the hospital?
There's not necessarily been pressure to be back on site. I think that there's 2 ways of weighing it there. Is that I absolutely agree that there needs to be some sort of presence for certain roles. So mine, for example, is that I've got groups of staff that are ultimately I'm responsible for. I don't feel comfortable in them never seeing me. So that would mean that I would tend to go into site once a week, maybe twice a fortnight, something like that. But I have completely lost my trail of thought. Ask me that one again, Katie.
So it was just around people coming back into the workplace, whether that's still encouraged in hospitals.
In terms of people, physically being back in work, no. I think that the majority of people that I work directly with in IT or in ops directors, things like that, I think that there's broad spectrum of people being on site or off site. There's an acceptance that whatever works in their department is what works, or whatever works for them personally is what works. There's no structure in this role needs to be on site on these days. I think that there are probably areas that do enforce that, like telecoms engineers. I've got a mixture of guys of different generations. They're mainly on site. One of them works from home a couple of days a week. It works for them, but it's not something that we enforce. There are obviously roles that you do need to be on site for, but I think there's a nervousness around the whole work from home or home worker directive. I think in the public sector, if they then define people as being home workers, it creates a whole different piece of work that needs to happen in terms of, I think you'll probably experience is there being acceptance of it. Someone that works from home and works in industry is that they'd expect money towards gas, electricity, Wi-Fi, all the things that you need to work, whereas that's not a topic that we've ever approached. In healthcare, certainly. My brother's a civil servant. They have to be in work 2 or 3 days a week, so I think it's different in different public sector organisations. But yeah, there's no real directive to have people back, and I think it's back to the neurodiverse angle that you were saying. Is I think it's how it works for the individual and how it works for the team. If someone is equally as useful and can get their work done from wherever they are, I don't see that it matters where they work from. Again, back to what I said about generation. Different generations are going to view that differently. They're not necessarily going to think that if someone's not present and they can't see them, they're not working. So I think it's a difficult topic, I think, in the NHS.
So I think, just to summarise, the conversation has mostly been around diversity, whether that's generational, whether that's from a neurodiversity side of things, and how communication has changed and how it's being viewed now. I think there's way more understanding and education around neurodiversity, and as a result, people are trying to do what they can. Is there one, just to kind of wrap up, is there one thing that if you could... If the world was your oyster and you were the decision maker and you could say, right, this is what we need to do to change patient experience in terms of communication and patient experience, is there kind of one key thing that stands out to you that you think, I would love to see a change here in health?
I think that every healthcare organisation should be made to have some sort of digital comms strategy, and not in terms of PR, marketing, that sort of thing. I'm talking how they interact internally and how they interact with patients. Because elective deficit's bigger than it's ever been. More and more people are waiting. British people don't mind waiting, but they just want to know what they're waiting for, how long they're going to wait, and ultimately then when are they going to have treatment. We don't keep people in the loop, we don't stay in touch with them, we don't use channels of communication that you expect to use in any other walk of life. I think that if we made a massive change there, if comms was far more strategic, I think there would be far better acceptance of the times that people are waiting for treatment, and I think that it would improve that whole waiting scenario. I think it would improve the whole culture and impression of the NHS, and I think that when people ultimately then arrived for their care, they'd already had this experience that it wasn't fast, but it was positive. They knew where they needed to be, they knew what time they needed to be there, they knew if they could change an appointment. They arrive on site, they know where they're going. There's not all these barriers that we throw out there. That's what happens at the moment. So I think comms, internal and external, needs to be way more strategic. I think there's something nationally that could enforce that. What that is and how it looks, I don't know, but it is happening in small pockets, just not all at the same time. I think a more joined up national approach would be super beneficial.
Yeah, and I think what I love about you is, as somebody that's so willing, you know, as a neurodiverse millennial that's kind of up and coming within healthcare and the NHS, it's brilliant to see you kind of flying the flag and really pointing out where change needs to happen in communications. So keep doing that, keep fighting for it, and it's exciting to see, you know, what will happen as and when you enter that kind of, hopefully, that board of directors where you really can make change. So. Thank you, Tom. It's been
No,
great
thank
to chat.
you.